It's really special to do it in Halifax. We sold out the screening. AIFF has been really supportive of all my past work. Like my short films got their first screenings at that festival like 15 years ago.
Who's Your Father follows a small-town private investigator played by Chris Locke as he investigates the sale of black market lobster in Prince Edward Island. Along the way, he gets help from an eccentric convenience store owner who has her own agenda, played by Susan Kent. I was joined by the writer and director, Jeremy Larter.
Maybe about 10 years ago, I was living in Toronto at the time and, a struggling filmmaker. Had a few things out at that time, but not making very much money. And I was thinking about side hustles that I could do to earn some income. And I came across this 1-week private investigator course that you could take in Ontario. So I was really intrigued by detective stories and private investigation anyway, up to that point. And I didn't end up taking the course, but I went to do an editing job I went for an editing interview at a PI company in Toronto, and discovered that most of what you're doing as a PI is just insurance cases. So you're just kind of like sitting in your car all day doing absolutely nothing. So I was like, okay, this may be not as glamorous of a side gig as I thought it was going to be. So I didn't go that route, but then thinking about a PI and PEI was kind of intriguing to me. And like, how would you be a private investigator in a place where the connections between people are so close? And I actually looked up private investigation on Google, private investigation and PEI, and came across one PI that was listed. This was a few years ago, and called the PI, and he told me, "Nah, I'm going to get out of the industry. It's way too close here. You try doing surveillance on your cousin's house with no cover in the middle of a field. No, it's way too close for me. I'm getting out of the business." So that phone call that I had was really sort of the thing that set me on this path of making this detective story in PEI. And I always, The Big Lebowski is one of my favorite comedies, and it seemed like an interesting challenge to try to tell a Big Lebowski-esque story in Prince Edward Island.
I love the layers and the twists as you went along, and also, you really kind of like captured the what you kind of imagine a PI in PI would look like with those kind of parameters that you kind of set out. I were you influenced by things like you mentioned Big Lebowski, but things like, I don't know, like Police Squad or like Bottle Rocket or any of those kind of like detective shows? Were there any more that kind of influenced how you put this together, or was it kind of the Big Lebowski? I can see the parallels. I can see the inspiration. Is kind of a good model to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was mostly like Raymond Chandler detective novels, which was also an inspiration for The Big Lebowski, and you know some film noirs from the 40s. Like originally, the first iteration of the script was sort of a ripoff of a 1945 film called Detour. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but
No.
it's on YouTube. You can watch it for free, but like the very first version of it was kind of like based on Detour, more focused on the junior character than the other characters. Um, but yeah, and then thinking about films like that I grew up with that I love, like Jackie Brown and True Romance and Punch Drunk Love, were also movies outside of the detective realm, but that were still definitely influences on this one.
Yeah, I think that like the way you could see the kind of a lot of the feel isn't noir. You definitely have some of the kind of characters and plot lines and things that are kind of reminiscent of noir, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a fun world to work in. Like the Raymond Chandler novels are really fun because they kind of go here, there, everywhere. Every kind of like strata of society is there. And I grew up on the North Shore of PEI, in West Cove Head, and it's kind of a touristy place in the summertime. So you definitely would have a mix of local working class people, and then kind of wealthier tourists that would come in the summer. So it felt like there's like an interesting range of personalities that you could bring into the story.
And one of the things that you kind of did, you captured like island sensibilities and that kind of sense of humor really well. But you, as an outsider, I've been to PEI once camping. I didn't get lost. It was kind of very relatable, kind of small town sensibility. So, how did you kind of tread that balance? It must have been something that was in your mind, I suppose.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's very not good to hear. I'm glad to hear that because it's always something that you want to make sure that the story feels universal, that it's not too far inside your own backyard. I think because on previous projects that I've done, like Pogey Beach and Just Passing Through, like I was going as full tilt maritimes as I wanted to, and that was the intention behind it. So I think because I've gone so far to the outside with inside maritime humor and comedy, like I have a pretty good sense now of where to kind of bring it back in to make it maybe a little bit more universal. But yeah, it is. It's you want it to be specific. It's really important to have that specific quality to it, but you also want to have the universality of the love story. I think helps to kind of like bring it in outside of the Maritimes.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, capturing different strata of society, the romance, there's so many different kind of universal elements. But it was I enjoy the kind of more regional stuff, like the turns of phrase that you don't hear all the time, and just the local gossip and how the smaller world that some people live in and operate in was just kind of I found it enjoyable. So
Oh yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, and it's funny. A friend of mine had gotten. I mean, I know quite a few PEI expressions from growing up there, but a book that was published about PEI expressions, and so it was a good reference to have with me as I'm writing the script. To have that book handy, just like okay, flip through a couple pages. Okay, okay, dirty enough to grow potatoes in. That's a good one. And then
yeah, yeah.
and then throw that in there.
Now, one of the things about the Maritimes and like Nova Scotia, where I live, and PEI, I'm sure is the same, is that you drive around and you see buildings or areas that are kind of trapped in time almost, that are from abandoned or just still operating from a bygone era. And one of the things that I loved about this was you had some incredible locations of I imagine real places in PEI that we could get jump in the car and go visit now. So, like, how did you know all those places, or did you go on your own kind of investigative road trip to kind of like source all these locations? Like, what was that? What was that process?
Well, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, finding locations is one of my favorite parts of the process of pre-production, and it was a mix of those two things that you mentioned. Many of the locations in the film were within a 10-minute drive of where I grew up in West Cove Head. Some of the locations were actually next door to my parents' house where I grew up. That's how small it is. Um, and I worked as a lobster fisherman for a couple of summers out of Trackety Wharf, but out of the Cove Head Wharf as well, where we shot the Richards restaurant scene and where all the wharf action takes place. That was shot in Cove Head, where I worked, and the store location is just 5 minutes down the road from my parents' place. So we found a lot of them that way, just from knowing them and knowing the people who live and work there. And Kevin Fraser and I, the DP, did a road trip across other parts of PEI to find some other locations that we weren't as familiar with, like the bar location where Rhonda and Larry meet after the store was a location that I wasn't familiar with, and it's such a great space. The Cardigan Lobster Supper, which is also a bar and a lobster supper in the one building. So yeah, it was really important for me to find the best locations because when you're working on a low budget, you just don't have the resources to build anything. You can't build a set. So the better the location that you find, the higher the production value you're going to get.
So was this kind of almost like a love letter to those kind of places that are like embedded in your like memory from like a nostalgic point of view, or like how much of that did you want to share with the world? I suppose.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely something I want to share with the world for sure. Yeah, like it's because I spent so much time driving around there. Like a lot of my memories of P are driving because like I lived 20 minutes outside of Charlottetown, so you're always sort of driving to get anywhere. And yeah, it's like the landscape of PEI is burned into my mind, kind of, and I really tend to stick close to my backyard. I like it's PEI, but it's also West Cove Head and Stanhope and Brackley and the places that I saw like every day growing up. So I just seem to be drawn to those places, but it is fun to find other little gems that you never knew existed, which does happen on PEI a lot.
One of the things I really liked as well was the night scenes. You used a lot of things like tail lights and neon signs. It looked beautiful, but it also was really reminiscent of detective film genre. Or tell us a little bit about that. I guess that was a conscious thing that you were doing, but I was just interested to find out more about the creative ideas behind them and kind of how you put it all together, I guess.
Yeah, that was the visual look was something that Kevin and I talked about a lot in advance. We had started a whole Google Doc with reference images, and he had a website that he used with other reference images. So we kind of poured over reference images for quite a long time, and it was a trick to figure out, okay, how do we get that film noir element into the visual style of the movie without it kind of being cheesy or too much of a throwback. um, but Kevin had a lot of, Kevin's an incredibly talented DP. And I'm glad you mentioned the cinematography, because I think with comedy, sometimes it can get overlooked, the craft involved. And Kevin did such a wonderful job. And a big part of what he wanted to do was to do the wet downs on the pavements of all the, like, the outside the diner and outside the store at night, to really give it that feel where you've got the light that's bouncing off the pavement, which is a lot of fun. And we had talked about using neon lights outside the motel and outside the store a lot. So it was a very important visual element. And as a kid growing up, I'm 43, so I started watching movies in the 80s. And for some reason, night scenes in movies in the 80s really burned into my memory. I don't know why, but the feel of, like, the crickets and the summer night was something that we wanted to convey. And it was always something that I really wanted to convey in a film, and never really had a chance before this one. Trying to get that feeling of summer night was really important. And Kevin's lighting had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and because I mean, like, you were inspired by noir, but at the same time, it's quite a bright, warm film. It kind of ties in with it's a comedy, but you really did. For me, I kind of really enjoyed those moments where it was kind of, oh, this is you've gone for something that is like inspired by a kind of scene you'd see in like RoboCop or Blade Runner, I guess, in terms of like at night. It's cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to kind of mix those elements together a little bit, and like capturing the colors of the island. It was like something that Kevin and I talked about a lot, because I live in the country here now, but I still get kind of blown away by the green. Like when I come back east, like in late June, early July, when things have just become green, like the greens and the yellows and the blues of the P and the like the rusty red of the PEI landscape is really fun to me. And it just happened to be like complete coincidence and luck that Larry's van that he drives just happens to be basically the same color as PEI soil. Like it just happened to be like a complete fluke that, like, the best van that we could find, like, looked like the island clay. So that was a coincidence that worked in our favor.
You could say it was like undercover and it was a conscious choice, but
Yeah,
I don't think the
exactly. He just
camera.
blends right
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Now, the whole you've got a really talented cast, but I'm a fan of Chris Locke, and it was really great to see him in this role and kind of see him kind of perform and do what he does. But how much of an element of Chris kind of improvising came into the role, or was that something you wanted to lean into his kind of comedy talent for?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I didn't want to impose too much on Chris. Like I wanted Chris to interpret the role as he saw fit, and to work with that, because he is a real unique, one of a kind talent. And there's something really special about Chris. He's got like a completely unique physicality. The way he moves is so special. Um, and so yeah, so using his on the toes sort of adjustments was like a big part of the comedy. So I let him do it. We left in a lot of things that we made up on the day. And Susan Kent, who plays opposite Chris, is also so talented in that way. And the two of them just had really funny chemistry together. And they would come to the set with ideas that they had been talking about, because they both stayed at the same motel like when we weren't shooting. So they were coming up with stuff together too that they'd bring to set that wasn't in the script. So the finished film is, it's quite different from the script that we started with.
I was going to say because Susan and Chris like worked so well together. I think visually they kind of bounced off each other, and you could just tell there was that spark. So, at what point in casting did you kind of realize that they were going to be the best match? I guess.
Well, it was a kind of a while into the process. I actually wrote the role of Rhonda Perry for Susan. I
Oh
had
wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I wrote it for Sue. I had met her on the set of a PI comedy series called Wharf Rats, and I was just Jason Arsenault and Jenna McMillan, who are producers on Who's Your Father, were the director and producer of that project, and I was helping them out. And I met Sue there. I didn't really get a chance to talk to her that much, but um, she was playing a supporting role in that series, and I could see like just how talented she was. I knew her from 22 Minutes, but anyway, so I wrote a role for her, not knowing her and not knowing if she'd ever do it. Um, because she's just so good. She's to me, she's like a Carol Burnett. Like she's just at that level of talent. And I felt like I hadn't seen her in a role that like just suited her talents like the way that I thought they could be put to use, and what she could contribute to it. So Sue was cast first, so she was the first actor on board, and then as we were finding Larry, it wasn't until we brought Chris and Sue together in Toronto and did a read together, where we saw the spark between the two of them and how much like Susan really responded to Chris. And there was just something between the two of them where you could just see like you just wanted to root for those two together. And then, funny enough, Chris got COVID. We didn't know Susan had COVID, and Chris got COVID. No, Chris didn't get COVID. Sorry, but Susan had COVID. We didn't know. This was like May of 2022. So, like even getting together to do a read was kind of like, oh, should we do this? Should we not? But I'm really thankful that we did, because it was the thing that sealed the deal. Because I knew how talented Chris was on his own. I knew how great Susan was, but seeing the two of them together was what made the casting choice easy.
Yeah, definitely. And like, how hard is it to get like an independent Canadian comedy feature made? Like, how much of a journey was this for you, or did it kind of surprise you and come together really easily?
I mean, it it wasn't that hard to bring it together, really. I mean, like I had I did the first draft of the script in 2015, then put it away for about 5 years, and then telefilm development funding came through for the second draft of the script, and that's really where the film became like the script became the movie. Um, and then once we had that, we fairly quickly, after we had a draft that we thought was decent enough, we applied to telefilm in 2021. So it came together quite quickly, and then we weren't able to shoot in 2021, because of the timing with summer. And then we came back 2022. So it wasn't really that big of a process. The casting process was probably 4 or 5 months, um, of working through that myself. But yeah, people say comedy is really hard to do these days, and I don't really fully know why. But like I don't know why all of a sudden it's like a tough genre. I mean, it's been around for a long time. It's very popular.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Barbie just came out, but people like comedy.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but they don't get made. It's a good question, because like independent comedies don't seem to get made very much these days, or not as much as they did. One of the things that did come up was like from the time that we got approved for funding in 2021 to shooting the film in 2022, inflation just kicked in, so the cost of everything jumped quite significantly. So that was a big challenge to sort of like readjust our budget, because it was already a low budget film, to try to figure out a way that we could actually do it.
Tell us a little bit about the kind of music you decided to use, and that process of kind of finding the right, you know, music affects emotions and it's a comedy. So how did you kind of pull all that together?
Well, yeah, it was a big process from start to finish for us, because the movie's a bit of a throwback feel to like, 70s, 80s, 90s movies, I'd say primarily. We've got the zoom lens going from the 70s films that I really love. And I think like, yeah, like the 80s elements from certain films. Um, so we were looking for music that was going to capture kind of that old time feel for the film. So when we were doing the rough cut, we had laid in like all these like kind of known but a little bit obscure great oldies songs that people loved. So the feedback we were getting on all the music was like, "Oh, the music's so great." I'm like, okay, that's good to hear. I don't think we can get any of these songs, but we'll try. And it's a low budget film, so we had a fairly small music budget. So the big challenge was like, how do we fill 20 plus tracks and original music on such a tight budget? And Aaron Como was the music supervisor. He's a musician. He plays in the Skydiggers and lives on PEI now. So he was on board as a music supervisor. So Aaron and I, he's got great connections to the music scene in Canada. So he really helped like hone in on like the old feel that we were looking for within like independent Canadian music, especially, and found some really great bands that I'd never heard of before. So he was involved in that side and digging out all those tunes. And I think we got like a really nice range of like kind of like classic rock feeling stuff, and then more like R&B stuff. And then Aaron and Noah Malcolm were also involved in doing the original score, which was a whole other thing. And they really infused it with kind of like, a detective, kind of surfy guitar feel, uh, kind of like a 70s detective feel, came from Aaron primarily, and Noah did a lot of the more classical compositions. So it was an interesting mix of like some moments are kind of like Hitchcock a little bit. So we kind of wanted to bring in like a bit of a Hitchcock Rear Window kind of feel for certain things. But the music is like an essential component of the film, and one of the things I'm really proud about how we were able to pull it off with the resources that we had.
One of the things that really stood out to me in your movie is the fact that you did your own version of Matrix style bullet time in a fight scene, but in a totally unique comedic way. So, what the hell was going through your mind when you kind of came up with that? Because it's brilliant.
Oh, no, thank you. That's funny. I've never heard anyone think of it that way before, but you're right. That is sort of exactly what it is. Well, that was like a product. That was a product of a necessity, basically, because the fight scene that I had originally written was just way too hard to do. Like we would never have been able to do it because of the stunts involved and the time involved. So that was kind of that fight sequence was being rewritten as we were getting closer to shooting it, and then Kevin actually uh, kind of had the idea to do it all in super slow mo like that, and then again it was like pressed for time on the day too, like figuring out a very simple way to shoot it and get everything that we needed. That was the second last day of the shoot. So yeah, so it was kind of like a product of necessity, kind of using and then improvising on the time. We're running out of time. How do we do this? And then finding a really clever. Kevin had a really clever way of framing it in the door of the motel, and then so that we could do the back and forth. And I wanted it to feel kind of like a ballet, almost like a surreal, sort of ridiculous ballet in a parking lot in a motel room. And I think I'm glad to hear you liked it because that's exactly what we were going for.
One of the things about your movie that I loved was the concept of the undercover swinger party scene where Chris is Chris is going into a swingers party in disguise, or poorly disguised, with it being a stakeout, and we're kind of from the perspective of Susan's character in the van. Where did you get the idea from for that scene? Because it was so entertaining to kind of watch him kind of bumble through that situation, and it's a setup that we've seen in like lots of
Mhm.
detective movies. Is that kind of was that the spark that kind of created it, or?
Yeah, it was sort of that was the initial idea for that scene, and I was always sort of like because I'd always heard rumors that these types of swingers parties existed on the East Coast, and I was always a little bit really. I mean, I'm kind of surprised by that, but then you do a little research and you're like, okay, I think they do exist. Maybe more in New Brunswick, not to give New Brunswick that reputation, but but the funny thing was that Chris and Susan and I were doing Skype Zoom calls as we were doing prep, as we were getting close to the shoot date, and we would go through the script together. Um, and we did that a few times, and then it was during those calls that scene evolved quite substantially, where originally it wasn't Chris going in. So we kind of threw back different ideas on those Zoom calls, and like that scene kind of really evolved during those conversations to be what it became. So that's again like where their talent and kind of great writing sense too, because Chris and Susan are both writers too. So that where they can think like writers, and you get that chemistry working in other ways, just besides just on set.
Yeah, and what kind of in terms of shooting in such a somewhere that is so familiar to you, in terms of once you actually got to the production side of things, what was that experience like being in your hometown, shooting in locations you spent as a child? Did you kind of pull a lot from the community? Was there a lot of community support and interest in kind of what you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels really comfortable for me, and it's just like you leave I was staying at my parents' house, the house I grew up in, and then you just get in the car and like so like there were days on set where I'd literally walk across the tree line on my parents' property and I'd be on set. Um, maybe that's cheating, I don't know, but it feels really good to me, and we always have so much community support on all of our projects, and especially this one too. Um, People have been really wonderful to us in the community. And, like the wharf location, that's the Cove Head Wharf. So one of the big challenges of shooting a movie in PEI in the summer is like shooting summer for summer because we had motels, golf courses, convenience stores, bars, places that people need to be in the summertime. So, so it was really tricky, but the people that came through for us were really, really great. We couldn't have made the movie without them. Like the store location was really hard to get. It was really hard to figure out how we were going to do that, and the motel location too. But the owners of those establishments really came through for us to make it work. And yeah, it was, without the community support, we'd never be able to pull it off.
And what about kind of your premiere now, screening of the movie at the festival at AAFF? How are you feeling? Are you excited to kind of come down to Halifax and, share your vision with the world?
Oh yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited and terrified. It always. I'm not someone who like feels comfortable watching something that I'm working on with like people in the same room. It really is a uncomfortable experience, but I am thrilled to be able to do it. That being said, like we sold out the screening. There's gonna be a lot of people there. I get very nervous and anxious about it, but I do enjoy it. If the crowd reacts, then I'll be able to settle down a little bit and enjoy it even more if they're responding in the ways that you hope they do. But it's really special to do it in Halifax. AIFF has been really supportive of all my past work. Like my short films got their first screenings at that festival like 15 years ago, and Pogey Beach played there. So I feel very comfortable there, and my family can come over from PEI. A lot of the cast and crew are going to be able to go there from the island and from Toronto. Like some of the actors will be there too. So it'll be special. It was a lot of work. A lot of it in my living room with my kids and my cats crawling all over me, which is an interesting challenge. So it'll be really fun to see it in Halifax.
Hopefully see you at the festival.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I really hope to see you there.
Thank you for listening to the 2023 Atlantic International Film Festival podcast. Don't forget that this guest and many more will be showcasing the best of international cinema across Halifax from September 14th to the 21st. You can find out more about the events and book tickets by visiting atlanticfilmfestival.ca. I've been Rhys Waters. Now go watch a movie.